this morning. As you know, and as we've said many times before, Iowa is ranked worst in the nation for its civil statute of limitations laws for child sexual abuse. Under current Iowa law, victims are barred from seeking civil damages against their rapist, even for something as minimal as covering therapy expenses the day they turn 19 years old. The deadline on justice is even sooner if they were abused by a school employee, therapist, or counselor, with a hard stop 5-year deadline beginning as soon as the child leaves the school or ends therapy. Since calling on legislative leaders and Governor Reynolds to pass a bipartisan leadership bill to fix Iowa's civil statute of limitations law before lawmakers go home for the year, both Democratic leaders, Senator Zach Wahls and Representative Jennifer Confirst, have agreed. Governor Reynolds and Republican leaders Whitford and Grassley have yet to commit. More Iowa survivors of childhood sexual abuse are coming forward, sharing the harmful impact of Iowa's laws that silence survivors and give predators the ability to abuse more children. KCCI TV8 recently covered the story of Edwin Graff, who was abused as a 13-year-old boy by an employee at his church, St. Patrick's Parish in Corning, Iowa. He told the priest about the abuse, and the priest failed to act. His perpetrator went on to start an orphanage in Kenya and abuse multiple boys. He was finally put in prison in a case that involved both the FBI and the United States Department of Justice. That is just one example of what happens when leaders look away from laws that are designed to protect predators instead of our children. Today, I'm grateful to introduce two national experts who are both survivors of child sexual abuse. They're joining us in Iowa today to talk about their experiences and how reforming Iowa's civil statute of limitations will help protect our children here and across the country and make our state a safer place to live. We'll wrap up with time for questions and answers. First, I'm very grateful to introduce Stephen Mills. He's the author of a newly released book called Chosen, a Memoir of Stolen Boyhood. Stephen is an ambassador for ChildUSA and an advocate for children and survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Stephen, thank you. I'm going to let you share your comments.
Thank you, Senator Petersen. My name is Stephen Mills, and I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I want to take a moment to explain that term, survivor, just to be sure we're all on the same page. We call ourselves survivors because many of us don't make it. When you're sexually assaulted as a child, it is quite common as an adult to succumb to drug addiction, mental illness, or suicide attempts. I personally survived all of those. So I stand here today representing not just myself, but my brothers and sisters who didn't make it and who never had a chance to get justice. Let me give you a quick synopsis of my memoir, Chosen, because it's directly relevant to everything that's wrong with Iowa's current statute of limitations. I was sexually assaulted at age 13 by the director of my summer camp in Connecticut. He was a respected social worker and community leader. He molested me for 2 years until I was 15, and he completely destroyed the boyhood I might have had. In my early 20s, I discovered that this man was molesting boys at another camp, this time in Illinois. When I spoke to high-level employees at the camp, it was clear they'd known for years what this predator was doing to kids, but no one would report him. They were too scared. I was terrified of him and too ashamed to go to law enforcement, but I confronted him and begged him to stop hurting children. He promised he would. Needless to say, he didn't stop. When that confrontation happened, I was 23 years old and getting my PhD in economics at the University of Wisconsin. When I realized that I couldn't stop this child predator and that no one else would either, I went off the rails. I dropped out of graduate school, began shooting drugs, and spent the next 4 years trying to kill myself. There's nothing unusual about this story. It's all too common. Fast forward a decade. In my early 30s, after years of therapy, I made up my mind to stop this perpetrator. He had moved to Pennsylvania, where he was supervising youth programs for a community organization in Pittsburgh. This time, I was determined to protect the children. I wanted to file suit against him, but I couldn't. I was blocked by the statute of limitations. So I collected statements from other past victims and witnesses and delivered them to the FBI and the Pittsburgh DA. But instead of investigating the serial predator, finding current victims, and prosecuting him, they let him quietly leave his job. He was free to go on abusing kids somewhere else, and there was nothing that I or my fellow victims could do about it because the courthouse door was barred to us. It would take me another 33 years to win the right to go to court, and then only because New York State passed the Child Victims Act in 2019 with a look-back window for older victims like me. Today, my perpetrator is dead, but at age 67, I'm holding his employers accountable in civil court because that's the only way to make sure that youth-serving organizations will put tougher measures in place to stop abusers and protect children. I want to point out a couple of things about my story. First, my sexual abuse happened in a Jewish summer camp to a kid from a well-educated Jewish family. Sexual abuse is not a Catholic problem or a Baptist problem or a scouting problem. It's a human problem. No community is spared, and we won't stop this scourge until all of us, of all religions and both political parties, come together to address it. Second, by the time my perpetrator died, he had run 5 different Jewish summer camps in 5 different states. He understood perfectly well how to stay one step ahead of the law and how to exploit predator-friendly statutes of limitations. I'm only surprised he didn't wind up in Iowa, but in Pennsylvania, he found another state with statutes he liked. By barring victims over age 18 from seeking justice in civil court, Iowa has turned itself into the Cayman Islands of child sex predators. You are effectively offering them safe harbor, allowing them to go on molesting children without any fear of having to answer to those victims in civil court. My perpetrator was many things, but he was not stupid. At the same time, you are telling victims that once we turn 19, we're too old to get justice. Please show me a victim of childhood sexual assault who has healed enough by age 18 to go to court. I've never met such a person. Most of us are living with the terrible aftershocks of sexual abuse for decades before we disclose it to another person, much less feel ready to go to court. Then there are those of us who didn't make it, who took their own lives as adults. If you're old enough to kill yourself for something you suffered as a child, you should be allowed your day in court to hold your abuser accountable. But in Iowa, if you're over 18, you're out of luck. You will carry that trauma and sense of powerlessness for the rest of your life. I can't imagine that any Iowan feels good about this injustice. In fact, I have to assume that most of the good people in Iowa aren't even aware of it. They don't understand that your state's current worst in the nation statutes of limitations are, in effect, a magnet for child molesters. Once they know the truth, the citizens of Iowa, like those of so many other states, will demand that the legislature eliminate the statute of limitations before more children are sacrificed and suffer for a lifetime. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you so much for sharing your powerful words with Iowans today. Next, I want to introduce KATHRYN ROBB, who is the Executive Director of ChildUSA Advocacy, also a survivor and a leading expert on civil statute of limitations reform, working with states across the country to add her comments to the discussion. KATHRYN, thank you for being here. Looks like you're on mute still, KATHRYN.
I didn't even know I pushed mute. Thank you, Senator Petersen, and thank you, Stephen. I too experienced a heavy silencing trauma as a little girl. I was abused for about 7 years, from the time I was about 8 until I was about 14 or 15. My abuse occurred in the family. So I know that heavy silencing trauma, and it stole a lot more than my voice. It stole my innocence, it stole my peace, my happiness, it stole my sleep. And I didn't share my abuse publicly until I was in my mid-40s. And this is why this type of legislation is just so vital. And this is why so many other states are passing this legislation. It is just sound public policy. Presently, based on the science that we have available, about 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 13 boys will experience sexual abuse or be sexually assaulted, often repeatedly before their 18th birthday. Think about that number. It's a little over 13% of all of our children. If that's not an epidemic, I don't know what is. Most of the abuse happens by someone the child knows. Stranger danger is just very rare. And without accountability in a state like Iowa, kids remain in great harm. This occurs in every single sector, whether it's schools or camps or doctor's office or religious organizations or families. No child is immune. And like Stephen said, this is not a red or a blue problem. It's not a Republican, Democrat, independent families. Everyone is affected. Christians, Jews, Baptists, non-religious people. It is a ubiquitous problem where everyone in Iowa is affected. And Iowa is, as Stephen also said, a very safe harbor for child sexual predators. So while Republican leaders play dodgeball on this issue, predators see a great opportunity. And as Stephen said, it's a magnet, or it's just a safe harbor for them. It's a safe place for them to be. Extending the statute of limitations is based on the science of trauma and the science of childhood trauma. And this is why so many states are passing revival legislation. And it simply makes kids safer, period. Right? The excuses by leadership that we don't have the time or we need to study this more, they're just that. They're excuses, and they're poor excuses at that. Leadership does have the time. They have the power to do the right thing. And quite frankly, their failure to act, to me, is nothing short of a co-conspiracy in a cover-up of child rape. Because when they fail to act, predators win, cover-up continues, and children remain in great danger. Civil laws, and I think a lot of folks just don't understand this, I guess naturally, but civil laws pick up the ball where the criminal law drops it, basically at midfield, because the vast majority of sexual crimes never go forward to prosecution, and those that do, only about half end in a conviction. Many estimates are about 10% of all sexual crimes will end in a conviction. So we need the civil statutes to pick up the ball and to fix the problem and to hold perpetrators and institutions that cover this up, hold them accountable. Presently, 17 jurisdictions have completely eliminated the statute of limitations for child sexual abuse, and 27 jurisdictions have enacted either revival or window legislation. 23 states have an age cap over age 50 or none at all. So this is clearly a national movement. It's simple. Iowa can act now. It needs to act now. This is up to the leadership. These are not your typical torts of a slip and fall or a fender bender or a breach of contract. People, we are talking about the rape, the sodomy, and the sexual assault of children. This is a very different type of harm. It's time for Iowa to act. They can act now, or they can continue with their weak excuses and remain the very worst in the country. Thank you for your time.
KATHRYN, thank you so much for your comments. I'm going to open it up for questions. If anyone from the media has any, you can either raise your hand or put them in the chat. We'll see if we can tackle some of those questions. All right. Okay, it looks like we have a question from Katie. Katie, go ahead.
Hi there. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to add the little face. My question is for you, Senator Petersen. I was just curious. I know that, we discussed this in a press conference a few weeks ago now. As the session has continued, have you heard anything more from your colleagues on the other side of the aisle? Has there been any motion at all since then? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll send a video follow-up from a discussion that senators had on the Iowa Senate floor in the last day that we were in session during points of personal privilege time, where Democratic leader Zach Walz specifically asked Republican Majority Leader Jack Whitfer and what his response was. I'll send that video footage to you so you have it. We still don't have a hard no, but we don't have a yes. One of the things that was raised in the comments on the floor was that you're just bringing this up now, and that's just absolutely not the case. In the floor comments, I listed the four or the bills that we have sponsored, Senate Democrats have sponsored for civil statute of limitations reform. Those bills have been stopped by Republican subcommittee chairs. The first year by Senator Garrett, and then the next 3 years, Senator Amy Sinclair, the Senate Education Chair, was assigned the bill and did not hold a public hearing on it for all 3 years. So the bill has effectively been shoved in a senator's desk drawer. So not only are childhood survivors of sex abuse not allowed to the courtroom, they're not even being allowed a public hearing in the Iowa Senate. So Senate Democrats have been reading testimony from survivors on the floor so that we can try and help Iowans understand the gravity of this issue. Are there other questions?
I think there's one in the chat about what kind of resistance have advocates encountered in other states. So would you like me to handle that, Senator?
That would be great.
Sure. So again, we have 27 jurisdictions that have passed window and revival legislation. We have 17 that have completely eliminated it. Just these states are saying, we're talking about kids here. We're talking about sexual abuse. This traumatizes people forever. Zero tolerance. So there's a lot of movement. The typical resistance we get is sadly from the Catholic Church, sometimes the insurance lobby, and sometimes the American Tort Reform. But really what we're doing is we're educating lawmakers across the country, and to no fault of their own, they don't have any experience perhaps in trauma and don't understand how trauma works. So I think just our educating lawmakers about the problem, about the crazy numbers of over 13% of all kids, and that's that we know of, by the way. That's probably a low number. So just the prevalence of the problem, the nature of trauma, why survivors don't come forward, why they don't speak, how silencing this is. We educate them, I mean, literally on the neurobiological things that happen in the brain of a child and that can really shut kids down. And therefore, they don't look at their watch and say, oh, I've got a year, I got to file, when they're in their, late 20s, 30s, or 40s, or whatever it may be. So we're really trying to educate them. And when we educate lawmakers, they respond. They get it. They get that this is a really important and sound public policy to protect children. And of course, legislators have the power to change these in-house court rules of statute of limitations. They have that power, and they're doing so across the country. This, again, is clearly a national movement. I hope that helps.
Thanks, KATHRYN.
Sure.
Okay, and it looks like Rusty's added the link to the recent exchange on the Senate floor to the chat room. So we can also send that out in the follow-up email as well. I think that ends our questions. Stephen, KATHRYN, thank you so much for joining us in Iowa, and to members of the media who have joined us, and those working in the advocacy field who are with us today. Just want to send an extra special thank you to you. You have the power of the media and the importance of getting this word out to Iowans about our state status as the worst in the nation. This is something that can easily be fixed. It's going to require leaders who aren't turning their heads away from this. And we need to quit shielding predators and start doing a better job of protecting our children and our communities. So thank you for being here, and we'll get follow-up information out to all of you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.